Hello friends, and welcome to a new episode of Reality Check. Our time is dominated by the ephemeral and the transient. The cultural deconstruction runs rampant, and the looming nihilism seems to engulf all meaning and existence itself. Yet the transcendence still manages to break through. So how can we detect that? How can we conserve the real in a time of deconstruction? I think a central element of modernity is the idea of disenchantment. The mastery of control of nature by science has made a significant contribution to this disenchantment. But is it scientifically possible to understand the world as enchanted? Today I'm joined by the renowned mathematician, physicist, and biologist, Professor Dr. Ernst Peter Fischer from Germany. Dr. Fischer studied mathematics, physics, and biology, among other things, at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena in the States, and habilitated on the history of science. He's currently teaching and lecturing in Germany at the University of Heidelberg and is an author and publicist. Welcome, Dr. Fischer.
Welcome. Thank you very much for talking to me or inviting me.
Now, in your lifetime, you have published over 70 books, plus articles, interviews, etc. You are truly a curious person.
Yeah, I love to write about science. I love science. I mean, the important word is love. I mean, you have to have love for something. You have love for sports, love for science, and love for your family or your wife. But science, from the very beginning, excited me. And when I was a young student, I mean, I was grown up in a household where there were no books. Mm-hmm. And one day, a school teacher asked me to better concentrate on books instead of only soccer. And so he invited me to join him into a bookstore. And in this bookstore, this is the luck of a beginner. I grabbed one book. It was called Mein Weltbild, My Worldview, Albert Einstein, from 1962. It was in 1962. And I opened the book and I read on page 9, the most beautiful that humans can experience is the mysterious. And the world is full of mysteries. And I thought, that's true. And I have to try to live with it. I love mysteries, not a mystery novel. But the German term for mystery is Geheimnis. And this is a term from Martin Luther. And he said, this is what you have in in the middle of this word, it's the word Heim, home. So if you have a secret, and that's important for the world, it's within you. And so when you look at nature and want to understand it, it has to be a Geheimnis, a mystery. And because you try to correspond what you see outside and what you know inside. So the inside and the outside try to find each other, and how they do is a mystery. And I love this idea of trying to, pursue this mystery. This is my life. And when you look at science under this aspect, you find in every discipline mysteries, and then you write about them. That's all I can do.
But do you not feel alone with that worldview among your other scientists, colleagues, and friends?
Well, when you start saying this, there's a mystery. They start to frown and say, "Oh, if we don't believe it, we can answer." I say, "Okay, give me an answer." My conviction is that science never has lifted a mystery or cleared a mystery. Science can only deepen mysteries. And I always explain this by looking just at the explanation why apples fall down on the ground, or why planets are rotating, or the Earth is rotating in the cosmos. I mean, first, so why do things fall down? The first explanation was given by Aristotle. He said, because they want to go down. That's a good idea. As you know exactly that is true, when you're tired in the evening, you want to go down into sleep in the bed. There's nothing else. So there is always a will, this in nature. Mm-hmm. It's also a will that this idea of a will we maybe discuss later. So, but of course later on people said, no, we cannot explain a movement by its goal or by its aim. We have to just give a natural causes. And so Newton came along and he said, it's gravity. And ever since then, you think you have understand why things fall down, because it's gravity. No, you don't understand gravity. But if you want, even Newton himself said, how can people believe in gravity? They don't see it. They can't measure it. It's just an idea from me. And they say, oh, gravity. There's no way to explain this. It took till the 19th century before somebody else came up with an idea how to explain gravity. This was Michael Faraday and later on James Clerk Maxwell. They did not want to explain gravity. They want to explain forces, electrical forces, magnetic forces, and they hit upon the idea of a field. And ever since then, we have a world of particles and fields. And I think we should consider this more closely, because now you can explain gravity by saying there's a gravitational field. And then you have the feeling, oh, now I understand it. No, you have just changed the words. Now you have to understand what the gravitational field comes from. And this was finally solved by Einstein. He said the gravitational field is coming by matter distorting space-time. You see, now you understand why you sit on your chair. What I'm saying is, it's a mystery why you sit in your chair. And when you explain it, the mystery has deepened. And this is what I love about science. You cannot explain the world away. You can only deepen the mysteries. And so, in other words, the mysterious keeps the world open. Every generation of physicists has a new way to solve this mystery. There's never a completion of science. They thought this when there was a philosophy of enlightenment, the famous philosopher Kant, Immanuel Kant. He actually thought that astronomy will be finished soon. They know everything about the stars that can be known. And there was a guy named Hamann, Georg Friedrich Hamann. He said, he's nuts. How can you think that the mystery is left? How you explain why a man wants to know? How you explain why animals sing or birds sing? You cannot explain this. There's a mystery. And it's beautiful that there's a mystery. Just love mysteries. And then you are attracted, then you are curious. And Einstein said, the experience of the mysterious is the source of the creativity of human beings. And this is the truth. So we have mysteries. We would like to solve them. And we cannot just look up in a book. So we have to give creative answers, our own inventions. And this is what I love about science. And it continues forever. There is no end in sight. And that's great.
But I'm going to ask you a difficult question then.
Yes.
But how can science give answers?
That gives a lot of answers in the technical sense. I mean, when you want to know how to run a car, or when you want to know how to lift a weight, or when you want to know how to measure fever, every now and then they have an answer come up with a technical answer. But of course, when you ask, what is fever? What is temperature? Here we go. You don't know. The point is, we can explain the world in detail, but we don't understand the explanation. So there's this. In German, we have two type of sciences: the Naturwissenschaften, the natural sciences, and the Geisteswissenschaften. You call them humanities. The humanities try to understand the world. Natural sciences try to explain the world. Of course, they also try to understand. But natural science is very good at explaining things. You can explain exactly how cells divide and how chromosomes divide and how many chromosomes are. There are a lot of things you can do, and then you can apply this knowledge. But of course, there's always something that you don't understand. There's always a limit. And there's always this mystery that remains, and this attracts you all the time. You can also, you don't have to always talk about mysteries. You can also say very much easier, whenever you have a question and you give an answer, after the answer, you have more questions than before. Everybody knows that. You know that. Every philosopher knows that. Every physicist knows that. But we always think, oh, the next question will solve the problem. No, the next question will give you more questions. And the next answer will give you more questions. It's whatever you do, you end up only with questions, and this is marvelous. Don't expect to a completion. Assume you could really predict the world. You really have a disenchantment. That's boring. And then
Well, this is
we
something that
don't
is
have to do anything left. We just
yeah,
go.
yeah, but this is something that's very interesting when you look at the especially people like Newton or even Kant or even Descartes, from a philosophical point of view, once they had established this perfect kind of mechanized world, they didn't want to live in it. And there's lots of what we know of biographical notes where they were kind of resisting to live in that completely mechanized world that they established to explain a phenomenon, but then they didn't want to be part of it because it's a world without mystery. It's a world without surprise in a sense, right?
It's a strange behavior that can be seen. The most popular is probably Albert Einstein. He came up with all these theories, and he wanted that the theory explains the world in detail, in every minute. But he himself considered himself free. I mean, if you want to characterize Einstein, he's the freest person you ever met. He didn't care about any convention, or his thoughts were just freely roaming. He was absolutely free, but he insisted that the world is not. And the reason why he insisted is he wanted to understand why people fight wars. If they are free to fight wars, he would be desperate. So there must be, in Einstein's view, some law that makes them fight a war. So he doesn't want them to be free. I mean, he doesn't want the world to be free, except him. So there's a contrary. I mean, there's a paradox there. But of course, freedom is a different concept, complicated concept that you know much better. But in that case, what you're saying is the people try to understand the world, at the same time hoping that there will never be finishing this understanding. There must always be some open question. And but of course, things changed in the 19th century. I mean, first, when you talk about Newton, or when we talk about maybe even still Michael Faraday, there were single scientists. I mean, there was one scientist here, one scientist there, but all of a sudden, science became a profession. It was in the pharma industry. It was in all kind of industries. Probably you needed scientists, and what you expected from these scientists is they make predictable results when they have a new product, how much it is, how many they solve. So the standard answers, and so the question came. So the idea came that science is disenchanting the world because you can plan it. And it just turns out, when this term was first used in 1917 by a German sociologist, Max Weber, he could have known that already there was no way to explain, for instance, the atoms. At this time, they had already a model of the atom, the Bohr-Rutherford model, which they could not explain at all. And there was no disenchantment. There was just, you had to use a quantum, which is completely irrational. You had to use imaginary numbers, which is completely transcendent. So there's nothing about of a disenchantment. Only science enchants the world. I call it verzaubert die Welt. With science, so the world becomes much more interesting, much more open, and open for discussion. And of course, at the same time, you always have some results that can be applied, can be used. You can, of course, make better fertilizers, you can make better cars, you can, and stuff like this. Of course, there are some problems involved with this, which we don't know to discuss, but science itself is only leading from one mystery to the other. And this is maybe a strange paradox. I mean, there's a famous book called The Dialectics of Enlightenment, Die Dialektik der Aufklärung. This Horkheimer, they use it for society, so political developments. I mean, that's you have enlightenment, and then eventually you have all the wars. So you should not expect this world with enlightened people to lead all these wars. Second World War, for instance. So that, but of course, there is, I think it's on a much lower level, a paradox or a dialectic. When you started with enlightenment, you thought that at the end, you answer a question about the world, you give an answer, and then you know. The enlightenment idea is that you can find the answer, and all the answers never contradict each other. And here we go. That's totally nonsense. I mean, the first guy who noticed this was, of course, again, Albert Einstein. when he, in 1905, tried to understand light, the photoelectric effect, the whole 19th century had worked out that light is an electromagnetic wave. But it couldn't explain the photoelectric effect, which was measured. And so the energy that's the light is giving to the electricity is they were thought to be proportional to the intensity, but it isn't. It's proportional to the frequency. And you can only explain this when you assume that there are particles of energy within the light. And so we have, ever since then, the question, if you answer the question, what is light? You thought it's a wave, now it's a particle. And that means it's a mystery. Because if something is at the same time a wave and a particle, you don't know what it is. So Einstein has converted something that we are used to something that is mysterious. And this is called romanticizing. We are romanticizing the world. The world is not enlightened, but romanticized. The world, and quantum mechanics is a romantic science. Every good science is romantic in the sense that they produce mysteries and produce polarities. I mean, light polarity and all the other, you can imagine a lot of polarities, day and night, good and bad, and so on and so on. So that we know that, but we always assume that there will be a final answer by enlightenment. Enlightenment is helpful, but only to encourage you to become a romanticist. That's my point of view.
No, it's fascinating. It's very fascinating, specifically since as a philosopher, whenever the philosophical debate touches on scientific or empirical data, it's the empirical scientists that try to shut down philosophy in its question. And so it's funny when you say, well, science for me is mystery. For me, when I encounter empirical science, for me, that's the end of mystery in a sense, because those are the scientists that then claim that there's no more philosophical reasoning, but there's only, the data and the facts that you have to deal with. So I really like what you're saying.
Yeah,
I have a very different experience from the other side.
You can measure as much as you want. You don't know what light is. You don't know. Even you can continue this. You can even ask, what is an atom? Is an atom a particle, or is it reality, or is it just something acting? I mean, here's your reality check. Atoms are no real things. I mean, reality, as you know, is from the Latin res, and there must be a thing, but there is no thing like an atom. The atom is just, let's call it an idea. And here we have the real problem. How do you cross the barrier from an idea to the material world, from the immaterial to the material world? And I think we are right now in the modern technology experience the opposite. We are trying to embody something that seems to be material. So we try to embody energy, we try to embody cognition. And so I found this fascinating. I mean, so artificial intelligence is embodying cognition, because eventually you don't need a computer with metal and ceramics, but you need something with soft tissue, and then it will be becoming interesting. And I think there is a great endeavor to embody energy, embody cognition, and eventually that will give us maybe a glimpse of what could be a unified form of existence. But I doubt that I will still experience it. I mean, it will take some time, but it might be very interesting. But I'm sure if you have such a unified existence, the opposite will waiting. If you turn around, there will be some polar distribution, some opposite, like a man turns around and he sees a female, or if you wait for the sun, you know that the sun is putting the darkness away. So there's always this duality. I think we live in a world full of dualities that starts from the very beginning. We always have the change between day and night. We don't have only days like enlightenment. We don't have only darkness like mysteries. We change between. We see a mystery, we try to enlighten it and find a deeper mystery. That's what I love.
You talked about this step from the material to the immaterial, which for Plato obviously is a central element in discovering the soul, right? So it's the step from realizing that there's an immaterial force or cause of the works of nature, the soul, the individual soul, and then maybe even a world soul. So do you think that thinking of the world without a soul is a regress, scientifically speaking?
No. I mean, the soul is definitely there. I mean, you have to, if you experience something and enjoy things, you can't do it just by rationalism. You have to have some joy, and this is something else than the reason that you're using to argue. But when you talk about Plato's soul, I think he has coined a much more interesting term that nobody's using. It's called ousia. Mm-hmm. O-U-S-I-A, ousia. And this is exactly what he wants. You have to get from the idea of triangles to the symmetry to the real world. And you have to make a step in between. You have to go from the immaterial ousia world, to the real world, and the step in between is ousia. Nobody discusses this. I think that's the greatest idea of him. And we need this all the time, for instance, even in the standard model of physics. You have to have, you want to explain mass, and then you invent a Higgs particle. Essentially, you invent a Higgs field that materializes as a Higgs particle. You see what they're doing? They're doing ousia. They're looking for Platon's ousia. Why don't they just call it like this? And Plato knew exactly that there is a step to be taken, that you can, of course, he can only discuss it, he cannot measure it, but of course physicists can take a closer look, and eventually we will understand how the ousia is working. There must be something in this, within the nature or within the reality, that is always wanting to act, to change. This is, from my point of view, the greatest mystery in in our life. Or it's a term that everybody uses, everybody thinks he understands it, but I promise you, I bet nobody understands this. This is a term called energy. Energy is an invention by Aristotle. It's a philosophical term. It's not a physical term. The physicists used it only 2,000 years later, and they used it in a bad way, and they're still using it in a bad way. But Aristotle said, if there is a real world, reality, it must have come into existence from the possible world. So there is a possible world, which we don't see. It's romantic because you talk about the invisible. And then you need a push to get it to the material world, and this push is called energy. And energy has the fantastic property of being conservative. I mean, you are conservative, right? So energy is conserved. The only thing that's really conserved is energy. And you know why? Because the world is symmetric. This is the famous theorem by a lady called Emmy Noether in 1918. She said, the conservation of energy is due to the symmetry of time. Okay. I could say this term 100 times a day and try to convince people how great this idea is. You have a symmetry and you try to understand the conservation. And if you have conservation of energy, and at the same time know that energy cannot stay in the way it is, it can only change, then you know exactly what the world is doing. It's transforming energy in order to get the form that we love. I mean, this is the short version. You could, of course, expand this. But once you hit upon these openings in the notions of science, you can write one book after the other.
And as you did, as you proved to be case in point. So I want to go back to this idea of the mystery and the romanticizing of the world. So in one of you have a little short book here, and the subtitle of it is the mysterious relation between quantum or quantum theory, genes, and Goethe. So what I find very interesting in Goethe's Faust, which is a story and an author dear to you, you cite it often, the protagonist enters a pact with the devil to discover the deepest truths of reality. So my question for you is this: if reality is really this mysterious, do we need a transcendent force in order to discover it in its depth?
We need a transcendence mathematics. The mathematics we are using in order to understand reality is transcendent. It has imaginary numbers. It has a number pi. All these all these symbols that we are using in mathematics don't exist really. They are free inventions, and they make up a new world, different world. But of course, they tell us how to the rest of the world is behaving. But the what I really let's see. What I want to say something else about transcendence. With the genes. Goethe is the most important thing, as I mentioned, is energy, because it's transforming and changing all the time. Mm-hmm. So the world is nothing that what you might call, as the Germans say, there's no being there. There's only a becoming. So the world is full of becoming, and genes are only becoming. If you look at your cells when you're born, the genes that you eventually have now have to be built. So everything is a becoming, and so in this idea that everything is in motion is a becoming, it's a romantic idea. Because you are also completely all the time changing. There is no I, because I'm learning, I'm discussing, I'm reading, and I'm developing, I'm growing older. So it's always change. And what we really need is a science that is is trying to consider this change. And this is what Goethe called genetic science. He did not know about genes. The term gene came in the 20th century. But Goethe knew that in order to understand science to explain the world, it has to be an explanation, genetic science. It has to explain the becoming. And I think there is only one theory at the moment that is the theory of becoming. That is quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics doesn't tell you how the world is. It tells you how the world becomes when you observe it. So it's you in the world that makes the world, and this is what we call genetic worldview. And Goethe saw that. But by the way, Goethe's devil has a different job. As I mentioned, we have a duality worldview. I mean, we have even the question what is light or what is a gene or what is an atom. There's always duality, and the Romanticism is polarity at the greatest. It's dreaming and thinking. It is day and night, and you can continue this. So, in order to really get to an understanding, you need a dialogue. So, whom do you have in a dialogue with Faust? I mean, this great guy. God himself cannot do this, but so God sends somebody. He takes an angel, drops him on the earth, and this is called Mephisto, the devil. But the important point is, when Goethe's Faust sits in his chamber and he wants to understand what's, so to speak, the force that keeps the world together, das, was die Welt im Innersten zusammenhält, he is not asking the devil, he's asking for magic. And this is what we all do. There is a book called The Magic of Matter. When you try to understand even iron or a metal or conductivity of a metal, it's magic. You cannot, you need quantum mechanics. You need very funny, if you want to describe the movement of an electron through a crystal lattice, it's pure magic. If you have to introduce spins, you have to use magnetic field by a rotation of the electrons. It's magic. You don't tell me you can measure it, because if you want to measure something within an atom, you can't do it because you need a machine, and the machine consists of atoms. You cannot go within the atom. So it's pure magic. It's pure invention. It's a free invention of a human mind. And this is what we have to know about science. So that's actually what Faust says. Ich habe mich der Magie ergeben. Mm. It's not a devil. The devil always has looks like some sinister fellow that really cheats or whatever, or murders or whatever. It's, of course, you should not. But the idea of magic, and the term magic was used in 2007 by a fellow named Steve Jobs. When he introduced the iPhone, he said, it's pure magic. And that's what it is. And we love it. We love it. Nobody understands this. I bet I mean, if you push the button, you have no idea what you're doing. So you use it as magic, and you love it, and we all love it. We need it. We use it, so we can run the world, but we don't understand how we do it. We understand maybe why we do it. That's our job. We have a moral philosophy, why we do it and what we want to do. But how we do it, no way. No. It's
this love for magic and the unknown is something that's deeply embedded in the human soul, right? It's deeply part of the human kind of makeup. But so you talk about dialogue, you talk about mystery, you talk about the enchanting of the world. So I mean, something here begs the question, which is, if you say this as a scientist, I mean, then is this polarity, talking about polarity between science and religion, is that an artificial polarity or is that a real polarity? Is religion compatible with science? That's my question to you.
I mean, of course, not really. I mean, you can ask the great guys. I mean, in my case, I have a problem with religion that is dependent on my family upbringing and my social upbringing is not of interest. So I am, when I see somebody praying, or I don't care really. But look at the great guys. For instance, Albert Einstein. He definitely said he is religious, but in a cosmic sense. And he said he loves the way Spinoza thinks about this. Mm-hmm. You have to be that the world is made in such a way that we can understand it, or you could say that we are made in such a way that we can understand the world. This has to have some. You have to have a feeling to be connected with this outer world, and this being connected means being religious. Religio means a binding to something, to the world. This is the official term of the world, and of course, but I like much better is a fellow, but Max Planck, my great hero, another great hero of the German scientific community, said in 1930 something. He gave a talk about science and religion, and he said there are two types of persons. It's the religious person and the scientific person. The religious person finds his way to God from the very beginning. The scientific person finds his way to God at the end. Because when he sees, all of a sudden, I can understand the world. I can understand quantum mechanics. I can understand the Big Bang or whatever. Then you get the feeling of thankfulness. You have to thank somebody that you can do this. You can thank your mother, of course. You can thank your teacher. But in a sense, if you are Planck, you have to thank somebody higher up there. And Einstein does so too. So they thank a God. And another great scientist, Werner Heisenberg, one of my heroes, he said, when you hear a piece of Bach music, you get the feeling that there's a central unit in the world that you can experience, and that is the same to all mankind. Maybe in Asia that would be different, but here we are in Europe and we have Bach, and so he hears Ciancone, and he says you get the same feeling when you think about quantum mechanics, that all of a sudden you realize what the laws are to make sure that you understand the stability of the atom or the movements of electrons. All of a sudden you have this feeling of there's a central unit that allows you to perceive it and participate in the adventure that this central unit makes the world go around. And so this is always the same feeling of that transcends the ideas. I mean, you have the mathematical formula, and that helps, and you can measure it, and you have data in that. But of course, the feeling, the experience, and the joy that you experience with this is transcendent. And by the way, as I mentioned, the formula itself also, I mean, there are imaginary numbers, transcendent numbers in there. So it's, if philosophers really want to understand how quantum mechanics could be found, you have a hard problem. Because you have to find that you have to explain how that people find something that is not from this world, but explains it. It's I am so excited about this.
No, it's indeed. It is very
very good.
beautiful. Well,
It's the same. You have to study all these heroes of science, how they experienced this, and they were all completely confused. Sometimes they made just jokes about this, but of course, like everybody, if you are really in a difficult situation, you may help yourself with telling a joke, and that release the pressure or and then you can open your mind again.
That's right. So we're running a little bit out of time, but as a closing question, I want to bring it back to the reality check. So you talked about the enchanting of the world. So as a normal non-scientist, non-philosopher, just a normal person, how can I develop a stance towards reality that allows me to see the enchantment of it all? What would you say?
You just look at light. I mean, try to explain light. It seems obvious. You push a button, the light is there, or the sun comes up and the light is there. No, all you want to know is, what is it? I mean, it warms you. It shows you the environment. It is, say you have senses for it. I'm not talking about how the light makes you see. That's another complicated. I just wonder what it is. And so here we come, and then we have a say that is, you have to explain part of it by an electromagnetic wave, and part of it by saying it's particles. And Albert Einstein, he came up with this idea in 1905. He died 50 years later. And before he died, he said he has spent 50 years thinking about the question what a light particle is, and he doesn't know. So don't tell me it's disenchanted. It's because it's a miracle. It's magic. So how do you, there's a light particle, obviously. It has energy. It has a rotation. It has no mass. It has color, eventually. See, like, there are red particles, green. Newton had this idea, but of course he was thinking of little balls. So what is a light particle? And the answer is, you have no idea. I mean, of course you have ideas, but other people have other ideas, and you can never know. It's open. And this idea of openness makes the world mysterious, and this is enchanting, I think. And the real disenchantment of science, science had there was a period where science disenchanted the world. This was when, for instance, Johannes Kepler noticed that the movement of planets is elliptical. When he realized this, early 17th century, people were thinking that the movement of planets were done by gods. The gods were supposed, this is a transcendental explanation, because you don't see the gods, it's just said. But of course, the gods make circles. Now Kepler says there are ellipses, and he is sure that the gods don't make ellipses. Yeah. So there must be not a transcendental, but an immanent explanation. He couldn't give it. He came up with the idea of inertia. That might be, and of course, only Newton later on realized that. So it's not that easy. And by the way, when I was a young student, I was completely confused by this idea of inertia. Everybody knows this Galilei climbing up the Tower of Pisa and drop two spheres. One is 1 kilo and one is 3 kilo, but they arrive at the same time at the bottom. How come? So how do you explain this? I think it's not that trivial. When you start thinking about it, Einstein did it. You have to distinguish different kind of inertias, because inertia is something that makes you fall down, and inertia is something that resists the movement. And they have to get together. And when you do mix them up or bring them together in your thinking, you understand why things are falling down in the same speed. But I thought this marvelous. I mean, you have a general idea about matter, and you explain falling of balls. I thought this was great. And this is what Einstein did all the time. And this is what I loved, the science. You come up with a nice idea, and you just help to understand the world. But in a sense, only that you are left with wonder. You are wondering about the explanation. And this is what I love, you give an explanation of a scientific fact, of an observed fact, but you're still astonished. You are still wondering about the world. And this is what I love by great authors. Why I always, I'm very sad that are not read in detail. I'm afraid nobody's reading Albert Einstein. I mean, we know about Einstein. We're reading Thomas Mann and we are reading Hemingway or whatever, but we don't read Albert Einstein. But Albert Einstein has written so nice texts.
Yeah.
For instance, he wonders, he has a glass of tea and he stirs the tea and the tea leaves. Turning around, eventually they settle in the center of the bottom. How come? So he makes a theory, and while he makes a theory, he can understand why rivers on the earth are meandering. What's the word? Meandering. So you look at the tea glass and you understand the world just by thinking. This is science, and I love this. And this transcends you're sitting at the tea table.
It absolutely does. Well, thank you, Dr. Fischer. I hope that all of our viewers and readers will get a little bit of a share of your enthusiasm in discovering the world. And I hope that with your books, you did your contribution to that as well. So thank you very much. And I hope that we'll chat again soon. And thank you for your time in your interview, and all the best for all of your endeavors.